Can you imagine what it's like to live in Israel right now? The fear, the anger, the sadness, the revenge, all the raw emotions following the Hamas terrorist attacks and atrocities. Today I talked with Avner Boskey, just one of millions of Israelis living this nightmare. Here's our chat. Let's get started. Welcome, Avner. Thank you for joining us during this very difficult time for you, your family, and the entire nation of Israel. I know this is, I think we're doing this on Wednesday, October 18th. And before we get to the nitty gritty and everything that you're going through and your nation is going through, let our those who are watching and listening to this a little bit more about yourself, your family, your background, a little bit more about you.
Very good. It's good to be with you, Mark. I'm originally from Montreal, Canada. Born there back in the time when Queen Elizabeth was queen, and came to faith as a Messianic Jew, believes in Jesus, when I was about 20 after a lot of searching. Ended up taking 2 or 3 degrees in various subjects like Jewish history and theology. I was a registered tour guide. I've been in Israel now for about 44 years. I've been a pastor here and a leader in the Messianic movement, a writer and author. My wife and I are both involved in doing music from a Messianic perspective and biblical languages, etc. And we have a ministry called Final Frontier Ministries, which offices out of Nashville, Tennessee.
Very good. Before we get to October 7th, pivotal part time in our history and your history, the nation's history. Let's talk about today. This is Wednesday. President Biden, our president, is in Israel. I think Israel, the French President Macron, British Prime Minister, will be there as well. Rockets are going out of Israel into Gaza, Gaza into Israel. There's a aircraft carrier fleets and groups that are stationed outside of Israel in the Mediterranean. Yesterday there was a bombing of a hospital. So much going on, so much pressure on the nation of Israel right now. The focus of Israel, of the world, is on Israel. I can't imagine what you're going through. And I was just, I'll let you talk in a second here, but I can't imagine the pressure Israel is going through. And I was looking to see the size of Israel compared to Oklahoma. Oklahoma is 8 times larger than Israel. And I was just trying to imagine if all of our neighboring states, whether it be Texas and Arkansas and Kansas, Missouri, were all against us, trying to kill us, trying to eliminate us. And not only those states, but all the other states, and Canada and Mexico, and everybody against us here in Oklahoma. So maybe that's a little bit more perspective of what you're going through. So let's talk about today. What's going on with you and your family in Israel today?
Yeah, actually, the size here of Israel, it's a little smaller than New Jersey, a little bigger than Rhode Island, just to give you an idea of the territory. Today, past 24 hours, there was a report that you mentioned. You called it a bombing. Actually, it wasn't a bombing. It was a rocket from Islamic Jihad that went bad and hit a hospital. They were firing from a Muslim cemetery in Gaza against civilians in Israel. And one of those 10 rockets went bad and hit their own people. And,
has that been confirmed?
Confirmed?
Okay.
Totally. Israel released signals intelligence, a recording of Islamic Jihad terrorists discussing the rocket and what happened. There's aerial footage of drones showing exactly what happened, and it was actually on Al Jazeera, showing the missile turning around and coming down from the firing, exactly in line with what Islamic Jihad was doing. But unfortunately, as you know, sometimes in the mainstream media, and certainly Al Jazeera, which is a Hamas-related media organization, there's a lot of propaganda that goes on, at least in the Middle East, in these things. And people are even now questioning, how many babies were decapitated? As if there were 5 or 10, that's all right, but if there's 40, then that's an exaggeration. Actually, President Biden got the number wrong. There were 40 babies found killed on one kibbutz, of which a bunch were decapitated. And also soldiers were decapitated too. But so anyway, what's been happening basically since Saturday of last week, so it's about 10 days now, you had an invasion, very, very carefully planned, with Iranian help, using low-tech features like Osama bin Laden used. That's why it took the CIA over 10 years to catch him. And they came in and totally attacked a peaceful area of farms and small villages, and massacred, raped, and burnt and tortured over 1,300 fatalities, and about 200 people who were taken into captivity. And if you compare the response of most of the people in the Middle East to that, which was to deny that it happened, to the response last night when they thought maybe that rocket was an Israeli bomb, which was instant, let's go to the Security Council and let's have 3 days of mourning. It turns out it was their own forces. One has to be very careful about what one is listening to from the Middle East, because there's a huge amount of propaganda. And it's very hard for many people in America to understand the fact that the people who did Al-Qaeda spiritually are of the same stream, out of the Muslim Brotherhood originally, and so is Hamas. It's the same people. And so that's put us in a lot of shock here in Israel, because we had been given the impression, which was very, very wrong, that if you just sent like $6 billion to certain countries, it'll all be fine. It's not fine. These people are committed strongly. They are as committed to what they believe as, to use an opposite illustration, evangelicals are committed to believing the Bible. They're committed to believing in jihad in the same way. And it's no help to us to try to sidestep that or downplay that. It's very dangerous.
Let's get back to October 7th now, that fateful day. One thing that was hard for me to understand is Israel is known to have great surveillance, and their Mossad, the Iron Dome, they have high tech. And then it took, paragliders that came in, and there were no, boots on the ground from Israel, any soldiers there, and they were easily coming in and terrorizing and destroying and killing Israelis. How did that happen?
Well, the part of that's a fog of war, because some of those things are not true, actually, verifiably from people I know who were there. What happened is, in the same way that bin Laden was able to hide from the CIA for 10 years, with all the focus of America trying to find him, he basically went off the grid. He didn't use a cell phone, didn't use internet. He did low tech. Everything was hand to hand, mouth to mouth, donkeys, not jeeps, that type of thing. What happened here, very similar, by the way, and very ironic and sober, is the attack was 50 years and 1 day after the Yom Kippur War of October 6, 1973. And that's like the attack on the Libyan consul's dwelling, back, which was done exactly on September 11th, because those dates are meaningful to those people who are coming from that jihadi perspective. And so what they did is they actually, there's an Arabic word for warfare in jihad, which is called tahdiyah, which means to give a false impression so as to win a war by surprise and deception. And what happened is they basically were giving the impression that they just want to have economic peace and prosperity, and if you just leave them alone, they'll be fine. But Ali Baraka, who is one of the spokesmen of Hamas, got on Russian TV last week, and he said, we've been planning this for over a year and a half to give a false impression. So the first thing is deception, which is very important in any kind of military strategy. The second thing is they use low tech. So what they did is there seems to have been a cyber attack on the Israeli system, which is an excellent system there. but it was all taken down right around what was it, 6:15 in the morning. The network you have of observer posts are towers, and you had people manning them, and paragliders, which again Hamas doesn't have the ability to train. Probably was out in Iran or one of the maybe part of Lebanon. They came over with paragliders and dropped manual bombs on all the observation towers at the same time. Plus the cyber attack. And then immediately they began to attack all the Israeli posts along the base. And I know this secondhand because my friend was on one of those kibbutzim, and he passed it and saw everyone had been killed in that base. So yeah, there were soldiers there, but it was a holiday. It was kind of like Thanksgiving holiday in America. People are kind of, relaxing a little bit, maybe hoping to get a weekend off. And there was intelligence that both the army and the military intelligence had, not military, it would be like FBI. And they were fooled, which I believe also happened in 9/11 and Pearl Harbor. So these things do happen, even with a good intelligence system. It's not inerrant. We were fooled. And both the head of the army and the head of the FBI in Israel said, hey, we screwed up. We didn't manage to do what we had hoped. We fell down on the job.
Yeah, a day after the surprise attack against your country, you wrote this. One question that many in Israel are asking is this: how could the most technologically advanced power in the Middle East, constantly under attack by its neighbors and well defended with the latest in military alarms and protection systems, be overwhelmed and totally surprised by fairly low-tech forces? So Israel had its guard down.
Yeah, well, when you think of 9/11, what was it, 10 box cutters? And, how many people was it? 16 people on civilian planes. It's disproportionate in the sense of it's unequal. Using low tech to defeat high tech is one of the things the terrorists around the world have discovered works very, very well. And unfortunately, people had what they call in Hebrew the conceptia, the conception that it was not going to be time for war. And they were fooled.
Where were you on that day?
6:30 in the morning, we had a air raid siren, a rocket attack, which can happen from time to time here. And so my wife and I went downstairs, and it was all over within a minute and a half, 2 minutes. The Iron Dome knocked it out. But
and that's fairly normal.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So you didn't think too much about it.
No,
because that's kind of a normal day of life to have rockets fired at you. And
at certain times, maybe not every day, maybe once a month or something like that. But what happened is at that time there were 3,000 to 5,000 rockets which were descending on the kibbutzim, moshavim, and towns in the area right beside Gaza, and that was a cover for the paragliders and the 2,000 Hamas and fellow travelers to cross through the fence and to begin massacring the civilians all along there. We didn't get that was happening. We saw a clip that someone sent on a cell phone of a white Toyota pickup truck with maybe 4 or 5 Hamas people in it, and we thought, well, what is that doing there? That's in the middle of an Israeli town in Sderot. Well, how did that get there? But there was no trail of breadcrumbs to understand yet. It took about 2 hours before we realized that there was a concerted attack. We had friends on the closest kibbutz to Gaza, and they had terrorists break into their house and they were there for 4 hours while they were hiding in their shelter. And their next door neighbors, their kids.
Give us an idea where you live. You live in Beersheba? Is that it?
It's most dramatic to say we're 62 seconds by rocket, Hamas rocket, from the Gaza Strip. But we're maybe about 15 to 17 miles away. Yeah, so we live near Beersheba. Actually, we live less than a mile away from where Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob lived in Tel Beersheba. That's where we live. And,
I mean, I can't imagine what you said 62 seconds by rocket from from Gaza.
Well, those who live in the area near Gaza, they have 15 seconds for mortars. That's nearly no time at all. And part of the issue is, and this is a really good question to ask, is how in heaven's name did we allow a bin Laden type of terrorist government to exist right beside us? And the answer goes back to various things, which we don't have time for a full history lesson. But in 2006, uh, Prime Minister Ariel Sharon withdrew the disengagement from all of Gaza. No more Jews, no more Israelis. And Condoleezza Rice, at that time Secretary of State, said, this is just the beginning. You're going to have to give back many other areas too.
You gave it
And
over to the Palestinians.
yes,
Okay. Was
Palestinians
that
had
West Bank and Gaza at that
no.
time?
He had said, just this, and then she said, no, that's the first step. You're going to have to do the same throughout the West Bank as well, which is still somewhat American policy. And what happened is there were elections overseen by the Carter Center, Jimmy Carter, in 2006, and the PLO lost. Okay, the PLO was a terrorist group which officially moderated itself, but behind the scenes, not at all. They lost. Hamas got in. Hamas was originally a social welfare group encouraged by Israel, but they had started about 1988 to plan terror attacks, jihadi attacks. And the first thing they did is they kneecapped the PLO people, threw them off of buildings. It's kind of like they said under communism, there's a free elections, but it's one man, one vote, one time. And so they took over the Gaza Strip and began to build an army to destroy Israel. And that started there in it started in 88 there, 87, 88, but then in 2006 through 2008. And it's continued ever since. So there's a lot of hands involved in this whole process.
Hamas took over Gaza in 2006.
Mm-hmm.
And then there was turmoil there, inner turmoil. Was that the Fatah and Hamas, if I'm getting my history right? And Israel basically said, we're going to put up a blockade and you just take care of yourselves. And is that kind of
there was an election promise that Ariel Sharon said at the time, if one Katyusha rocket, one Qassam rocket is fired, we're going back in. Well, we've had, 40,000 since then. So I think that election promise went by the side. And I think the concept that one can negotiate with Hamas or Iran or Al-Qaeda, I think is severely mistaken. And part of the blood that we've seen in this past 12 days is a result of a really mistaken policy.
But over the past, since 2006, thereabouts, and we've got, 16, 17 years, there's been on and off skirmishes, conflicts, but by and large, it was peaceful until
Not at
October
all.
7th?
Not at all. Not at all. I just did a newsletter on this. We've had actually 15 mini wars since then. Each one of them started by Hamas terrorists coming in and killing Israeli citizens. So it's been every year, every 2 years, sometimes twice a year. It has not been quiet. It's not always reported well around the world. I've been watching on both sides. I've lived for a while in Russia where I was ministering, and I've been in America for years and Europe. And I see the way it's reported, and I look at the actual footage from Israel, and it's totally different. So sometimes it's just like if you don't report on it accurately, maybe people won't have the same opinion.
Go back to October 7th. Describe that day for your country. What happened that day to your people?
Again, right at the beginning at 6:30, people knew that there had been a bunch of rockets fired. Within 15 minutes, people realized that there were a huge amount of rockets fired in the area around what we call the Gaza envelope across the border on the Israeli side. But then it moved up toward just southeast of Tel Aviv. But then there was kind of a 2 hours of quiet until the reports started coming out. And there weren't reporters on the ground so much. It was kind of cell phone stuff. And people began to realize, what are jihadi terrorists doing in Israeli farms and cities there? And it took probably another hour or two before people realized something's going on really terrible. But already by noon, there was an understanding that there was a massacre. Uh, I was just talking to a group in Florida. They had a news item about a 2-year-old who was kidnapped from their car, and I'm saying, well, what happens if it's 200 people kidnapped? That's kind of what was going on here. There was a kind of a new age music festival that the terrorists stumbled upon. 200 and they machine gunned over 250 bodies were found there. And many of the young teenage women were actually raped by the jihadis between the corpses and then shot or taken off into captivity. We're talking about a level of violence and cruelty that bests the Nazis in their work in Ukraine and Poland. Very, very heavy stuff. And these are not people who dialogue. They don't believe in dialogue. It's against the Hamas charter to dialogue. It's really classic jihad.
We hear a lot about the resolve of Israel following the terrorist attacks, the atrocities by Hamas there, that at all costs now, Hamas will be eliminated and destroyed. Is that pretty much the unanimous decision or feeling of Israelis?
I would say, as far as most people and most, we have a civilian army, so everybody's in the army. I would say all across the board, yes, because you can't dialogue with Hitler. There's no peace treaties you can make with Hitler, with Al Qaeda. At the same time, and again, if one looks at, I'm working on a newsletter on this actually right now. If one looks at the history of superpowers, and I won't mention any names, but they can be found just by Googling, from 48 until right now, there's been pressure by some of the top superpowers anytime we can decisively defeat the forces of jihad, to pull back, to give humanitarian help, to so that what happens is the people who kill us are around to kill us again. And again, if you can imagine the British and American pilots at Dresden saying, well, we want to make sure we're not hurting any innocent Germans. They didn't see it that way. And it's actually Israel who's trying to get the innocents out of the way. And Hamas is saying, no, we don't want people to move away. Israel's saying, we're going to start our campaign. Please get south, go toward Egypt. Egypt says, we're not going to let you in. So Egypt is not willing to have a humanitarian corridor for Palestinian refugees. And Hamas has been shooting, actually, Palestinians trying to leave toward Egypt, and saying, no, you have to be cannon fodder to defend our view of jihad. So it's a very sick situation. And this stuff you can, again, find it on public media if you look.
Tell us the difference between Palestinians and Hamas. Can you love and support one while hating and trying to destroy the other?
Well, yeah, it's kind of like the difference between bin Laden and the people of Saudi Arabia. He is one stream, and a very activist stream he was. Palestinians are actually, if you go back 70 years ago, that meant Jews, actually, because the Palestinian mandate was both Jews and Arabs, but it's become the term for Arabs in that area. But technically, I speak both as a tour guide and as a person with degrees in Middle Eastern history. The Palestinians are the same people, whether they're in Gaza, in Israel, in the West Bank, or in Jordan. It's not a different people. You can call them by different names. So Palestinians who are under the control of Hamas in Gaza don't have freedoms. There are no rock festivals. There are no LGBTQ or whatever the name is. I don't have it right yet. They don't have any movement like that. Christians are persecuted and actually shot. It's a really hard thing. When Egypt was in charge from 1948 to 1967 of the Gaza Strip, it was a military dictatorship, and they didn't allow Palestinians to come into Egypt. So a Palestinian is someone today, popular use of the term, is an Arabic-speaking person who has lived somewhere between Gaza and Jordan. And specifically, the focus would be like Israelis. We have 2 million Arabs. They're Palestinians, but they don't call themselves Palestinians. They call themselves Israeli citizens. The Jordanians in the West Bank, they're Jordanian citizens, but they're the same people on the other side in Israel. The Jordanians themselves are Palestinians, and they tried to overthrow King Hussein, and perhaps one day they will. They're also the same people. So it's an Arab swath across there, and the term Palestinian is often obscures more than it reveals.
Now, Israel and the Gaza Strip, you've coexisted for many years now. Do you have friends in Gaza?
Well, we haven't coexisted. I appreciate the good thoughts. They're kind of like Father Christmas thoughts. We haven't coexisted. We've had 15 wars. Okay. When up till 2005-6, when we gave the area, disengaged from the area, it was normal for Gazans to come and work in Israel all the time. Even today, there are still Gazans who have come until recently to work in Israel. In our house, we have friends who have come and built who live in what you would call the West Bank near Hebron. This whole we lived with the Arab population of the West Bank from 48 till 93, 95, was it, or 2003, with no problems until Hamas started doing terror bombings in buses and shopping centers from the West Bank. And then we said, okay, we have to put up a security wall. So 40 years living in peace. I used to go to Gaza all the time. Today, my life would not last long if I did so. And it's not the other way around. Arabs are not attacked and massacred. When people talk about proportional response on Israel's side, are we supposed to go in, find a rock festival, and murder 250 kids and then rape all the women? Would that be acceptable? Israelis don't do that. We just don't do that. So it's, but there has not been, the people in charge of Gaza, they really believe in classic jihad. They really do. They're the same people like bin Laden. And it's hard for some people to understand that because in America, everybody's nice to each other, except when there's elections. And so, but yeah, it's a real problem.
You just talked about proportionate response, and you also wrote this in a recent newsletter. Take note that the God of Israel is not calling for a proportionate response against his enemies. So Israel is not looking, Israel is looking to destroy Hamas. So
Yes, but yeah, I just posted a clip from Colonel Richard Kemp, who was in charge of NATO forces in the Yugoslavian campaign. I've met him and talked with him. And he says of all the armies in the world, Israel is the most outstanding in terms of wanting to avoid civilian casualties. We have, instead of bombing civilians, we do everything we can. We even send soldiers in by foot, going house to house, trying to be really careful. And I know these soldiers. I know the special operations forces who do this. That has never been an issue with us. But at the same time, you have rockets being fired, like this rocket that hit the school, the hospital, sorry, Al-Ahli hospital in Gaza. That was fired by Palestinians and hit Palestinians. And if it hadn't hit them, it would have hit us. And that's what we live with all the time. So if the world is upset about rockets being fired, they're not upset about rockets being fired at us.
for
You know,
for
the
years, for decades, for centuries, Israel has been self-preserving, self-defending itself. Did that all change pretty much on October 7th, and now they're on the offense?
No, I think Israel was born out of war. As far as 48 is concerned, we were invaded then by 5 Arab armies. I think in 67 we were invaded. I don't know if it was over 10, and in 1973 by 21. We even had Russian and North Vietnamese and Cuban pilots and tank people. So we have had to fight to survive. That's been our ethos, and it's because we live in a very unfriendly neighborhood. And the riots that have been happening across the Islamic and Arabic-speaking world are only when they think we're winning.
I'm trying to get an idea what life is like in Israel, has been and is right now. here in this country, we're watching the baseball playoffs, the NFL games. We're taking our kids to school. We're going to concerts, shopping, stuff like that. What's what's everyday life for you in Israel, especially after October 7th?
Let me use an illustration from the Vietnam War. Soldiers coming back on furlough would walk around the streets of America and say, how can people be living such a quiet and good life and have no idea what's going on in Vietnam? World War II is a little bit different. Everyone was mobilized and understood the importance of the challenge. Here in Israel, right now, because we've gone through this so many times, I served in the IDF. My kids have all served in the IDF. We've been actually in the same areas with a 30 to 40 year difference, 20, 30, 40, depending which one. People here in Israel are really sick and tired of what's gone on, and we feel that something has to be done decisively. And part of the difficulty is Israel believes that we're the ones who should actually determine how to defend ourselves. And I know there is a geopolitical issue. There is Iran, there is Iraq, there is Syria, there is Lebanon. And part of the reason American aircraft carriers are coming to the area is because America doesn't want anything to explode. But in order to get it not to explode, it could be that there's a strategic decision, like in 91, when I was in the service here in the Gulf War, that Israelis may be collateral damage in order to keep everything quiet. And that's a difficulty. For those who are praying people, I don't know who your audience is, but some of them must be praying people. If they would really pray that there would be God's understanding about how to deal with our enemies. Joshua is in the Bible. I know many people don't like Joshua, but he is in the Bible, and God sent him out to do something. And in World War II, people understood that a little bit better than people understand it today.
You end your newsletters, and I don't have that in front of me, but in what to pray for. And I think a few of them pray for shock and awe. Am I correct on that?
That's a term I borrowed, I believe,
Right.
from
Is it
Storm and
Schwarzkopf?
Norman.
Yeah, right. Norman Schwarzkopf.
Yeah.
So that's one of the things that you want people to pray for. Are we talking about the ground war? That's
Yeah,
imminent?
well, it goes air, artillery, and then ground. Those three
Right.
things happen.
Right.
The thing is, and this is terrible. I mean, it is terrible when you have a terror group honeycombed tunnels more than Vietnam under the ground, and when they pop up and try to shoot, capture, kidnap Israeli soldiers, what do? Do you say, well, let's just let that happen to us? When you fire rockets against civilians from a civilian area, do we just say, well, I guess that's ours for the day? We have a terrible situation here. And can you imagine, as you were illustrating, let's say in Windsor, Canada, God forbid, they were shooting rockets to Detroit. And America said, well, we can live with that. Or there's a peace process. Or maybe we need to give Canadians a little bit more corn. It's ridiculous to think that such a thing could happen. And that's how close we are. And that's where we are. So war is hell. There was a famous American general who said, I don't want to hear any of you say you're going to die for your country. Let the other son of a gun die for his country. In jihad, in the Quran, the quote from Muhammad is, jihad is kill and be killed. And it's considered a spiritual advancement if you are killed as a jihad. You go straight to the garden and you have 70 virgins, perpetual virgins. So we're dealing with a really sick situation here, and we may not like it. We may say, well, is that really Islam or not? These are issues for another time.
Your Prime Minister Netanyahu says that Hamas will be destroyed, basically paraphrasing, at all cost. And he appears to have the backing of the people, and I've read that if the government doesn't follow through with this, they'll replace the leaders and to find leaders that will do this at all costs. I mean, at this point, there will be civilian casualties. a lot of that's war. I mean, at what point will your knees will they ever get weak and
Well, you're asking some really good questions, and I'm a student of history. I have a degree or two in it, and I know that things don't always work out the way people would like, even the best laid plans of mice and prime ministers. And so, in terms of watching how the nations, including maybe even America, have put pressure on Israel not to have a decisive end to the terror threat here. And I know it's hard to believe, but it's happened, and anyone can look at this on Google. It's nothing which is not open source. We've had pressures from the best of them, saying do not pursue decisively. And so then the question, what would happen is what happens if two countries, um, what if their interests are not 100% the same thing? You know? And no two countries have exactly the same interest, and every country is supposed to defend its own interests. The question is, what happens if you have allies and you're not defending your allies' interests? Then to what extent does that relationship have to be reconsidered in terms of what we call realpolitik, talking turkey?
do you think Israel welcomes the support of the United States and President Biden, or does this just muddy the waters?
No, I think it's both, truthfully, because humans are very, uh, you know, difficult, complicated people. The book of James says sweet and bitter water shouldn't come out of the same spring. Sweet and bitter fruit shouldn't come from the same tree. So sometimes America's been a huge advocate, and we incredibly appreciate that. At the same time, there are strings attached and conditions, and sometimes those are for America's benefit more than it would be for our benefit. And I understand that totally. That's the real world we all live in. The Bible says that that there's a charmed blessing cursing over Israel in Genesis 12:3. That if you bless Israel, there's a blessing, and if you do things which are going to hurt them, God isn't pleased. So that's a whole different issue, a spiritual issue. Maybe not for this discussion, but there's a huge groundswell of America, of support for America and love for America in this country. But at the same time, big superpowers are like elephants and bears. They may hug you, but you have to be careful how hard they squeeze.
We're seeing some protests here in this country, in college campuses, support for the Palestinians, a lot of the support for Hamas. Are they misguided? Do they just not know, or are they? What's your reaction to that?
I was raised by communist parents. My mother spied for the Soviet Union. I went to school to become a revolutionary. So, as far as understanding how many academic people today have been seeding that within the higher educational institutions of America, this is partly the fruit. Some of these people are deceived. Some of them are frankly evil. I know that's sin is a bad word today. It only applies to Jeffrey Epstein. Sin is all over the place. And for those who are going to defend Al Qaeda, this is Al Qaeda. You study; it's the same. Sheikh Abdullah was a teacher of Osama bin Laden, and he was the main founder of Hamas. So it's the same thing. So would America allow free speech to the point of advocating for Al Qaeda? That's what's going on. It's in a Muslim world. It's exactly the same thing. But Americans are actually not aware enough, and they in the name of free speech, there's something called imminent danger. Past Oliver Wendell Holmes, there was something later called imminent danger. We're dealing with an imminent danger, and 9/11 was the fruit of that imminent danger, and it's not finished. It's really not finished.
Do you think there's a lot of discussion here about university presidents? They need to come out more strongly against the atrocities. Do you see that that's important for them, the presidents of these schools, these colleges, to come out
I think that
strongly?
would be helpful, but America is weak right now. I'm sorry to say, and I cry to say it. I think the foundations that used to be have been eaten away by the termites of history. And apart from a real spiritual return, uh, there are problems. And that's not only true with America. Listen, Israel, we have the Bible, we have the God of Jacob. But for us, many of our spiritual foundations have eroded as well.
Where does this, let's talk about briefly here. I know you could probably talk for hours on this. Where does this play in Bible prophecy?
Well, one of the things I went to a school, Dell Seminary, which focuses a lot on Bible prophecy, and I love Bible prophecy. I have two caveats or concerns. One is some people look at the whole thing like a huge chess game, and there's no heart for either Jews or Arabs. And it's kind of like, is this going to be the key to that? And I know more than you. So that has to do with a cold heart masquerading as a spiritual perspective. And I would warn people away from that. The second thing is when one is looking at Bible prophecy, there are those who shoot first and ask questions afterwards. They say, I already know what's going to happen, and so this either fits or doesn't fit in. If it doesn't fit in, let's ignore it. I think one has to be a student of the Word. One has to look and see what's clear, and there's certain things which are clear, and there's a whole lot which is less clear. So my principle when I teach, and I've been doing this for over 40 years, is to start from the things which are clear and then to move to the things which are less clear. So, for example, it says at the end of days, God's going to bring the Jewish people back to their land. That's what he calls it in Ezekiel. He says he's going to bring the Jewish people back without the Holy Spirit, but by the Holy Spirit. And then at a certain point, these dry bones, which is a subject of many songs and movies and stuff like that, the dry bones are going to get filled with the Holy Spirit of God, and they're going to stand on their feet, and they're going to turn into a huge army, much, it says in Hebrew. Chel gadol me'od me'od. So that's coming. It also says that the neighbors, especially Ezekiel 25 and then 34 through 37, are going to be very opposed to this, and God's going to get very angry at them. And so that's just to start. That's just to get your attention. But I would say it's so important to deal with the human cost and the humans involved. When I see suffering, it doesn't matter which side of the fence, I cry. And I reach out with the same message to those who are Jewish and those here in this area who are not Jewish. And I love so many things about the Arabic culture, language, and so I don't see them as less humans at all. At the same time, if people are going to be trying to kill what's called in the Bible, Zechariah 2, the apple of God's eye, that's a bummer of a birthmark, and we need to see that too.
Are you fearful? What are your feelings now? Are you fearful? Are you hopeful in the coming days, weeks, months ahead?
I may be strange, but I'm not fearful. I've been in situations like when Saddam Hussein was shooting scuds on my family, and I was in the service in Hebron. I was concerned for them. I've had to cancel a trip to the States just now that I planned for a long time because I cannot not be here when the potential of a regional war is coming. I need to be with my family. But I don't know. I just have a sense of God's love for me and protection. But at the same time, the guy who came to repair our toilet today, his dear friend, was the DJ at that music festival when Hamas came in, and he was both shot and his body was burned so badly it took 7 days to recognize it. That's just something I heard this morning. So yeah, there are problems, and some people respond with fear. I think it's very human. I what can I say? They say that a hero is a coward who doesn't run away.
I can't imagine. You mentioned at the very beginning you're 62 seconds by rocket away from Gaza there, but so that's your lifestyle. That's what you've been dealing with for years, and now it's even more dire with this ground war imminent, and I don't know if this is going to expand beyond the borders here. To get Iran, you've got Hezbollah, if you got our aircraft carriers there, and so All I can say is we support you. We support
I really
Israel.
appreciate that. One of
And
the things that geopolitical people like Kissinger or others would say is a lot of this is Iran talking to Saudi Arabia and America and saying, hey, we see ourselves as the inheritor of the Islamic world. And we don't like any forces in the Middle East at all, whether they be Russian or American or Israeli or Saudi. And so our client states who we train, arm, and give strategies to include Islamic Jihad and Hamas in the Gaza. They include Hezbollah, which has 150,000 GPS-guided rockets aimed at us. It includes Syria, where all the weapons flow through. It includes Shiite-controlled Iraq after America left. And it includes the Houthis in Yemen, who can field armies of drones. So this is a message that Iran is giving to America, to Saudi Arabia, to Israel. We don't like what you're doing. It's like that scene in the movie Star Wars in the bar, where the guy says, my friends don't like you. And then he says, I don't like you either. And that's kind of where we are in the Middle East. We're in that bar in Star Wars.
do you think Israel can defend itself? Doesn't need help from anyone else?
Well, this is a hard thing. This is a geopolitical question, right? 150,000 rockets. We could, in a preemptive strike, take out half of them, but the
Iron
other
Dome.
half would do a lot. And Iran has been hoping, and this is part of the apocalyptic perspective in Shiite Islam, also in Sunni Islam, but more so in Shiite Islam, where they see the final battle being ending up in Iraq, in like near Karbala and all that stuff. And so they're looking for that. They think this is good. This is not only believing in the war of Gog and Magog, it's saying, I want a front seat and I want to be involved. That's kind of their perspective. And so they would like to get Turkey involved. Turkey has been one of the main supporters of Hamas, as well as Qatar, where America has a lot of military and intelligence forces there. Qatar is the main supporter of Hamas, then Turkey. And they're hoping that these countries will come involved. And this is very similar to Ezekiel 38 and 39. I don't think it's exactly the same thing, but some of the players are really in position and very active. That's the war of Gog and Magog.
Before we go, what's your final message to us in America and the rest of the world?
I would say take the God of the Bible very seriously. Read his word, which was written 95% by Jews, and 95% talks about the Jews, although it's used in Sunday school as devotional material. See what's on God's heart. God wants the nations and Israel to turn to him, and we're not really doing that. And C.S. Lewis once said, God whispers in our pleasures and he shouts in our pains. It's his megaphone to raise a deaf world. And I think God is trying to get people's attention. I cry for my own people because we, between all the anti-Semitism coming from the Christian church in history and the hatred of Jews from the world, we're not sure if we can trust God. And in the rest of the world, there's this huge secular perspective that none of this matters anymore. It's all living a good life, and that's it. So yeah, God is calling the whole world back to him, and he's using these things. And we need to seek his face and see what he wants from us. And that's an individual choice and an individual responsibility.
Avner Boskey, thank you very much for your time today.
Thank you for having me, Mark. It's a pleasure to be with you.